these are general technical.
Actually, everyone mute for a second just so I can test it.
Article 12 is the article that we talked about. It didn't have language last week. Ron, do you mind going to that language, please? Which is now Article 12 is the noise bylaw.
Oh, sorry.
So we've all been receiving comments about the protest, and some of the comments are about safety, some of the comments are just about politics, but a lot of the comments about the disruption that those protests, those what have become regular protests on the monument on Thursdays, have caused to the educational environment in Hadley, particularly during this time of COVID, in-school learning, in hybrid.
Okay, it works. I'm good. Just let me know when you want to go live. Thank you.
So what's on the, what were we just listening to? Is that the select board meeting?
Yeah, that's going on at the same time.
Oh, I like what they're talking about.
They were just talking about Hadley Reuse Committee, and then now they're talking about a noise ordinance to shut up those. Oh, I just muted myself. What?
No, you didn't. That's good. I like hearing that. I can't believe it's the end of October.
Unbelievable. I haven't even thought about Thanksgiving and what we're gonna do as a family. It's like, I don't even know.
Well, I will say before we, I have a fake tree that last year I had some problems with, and they were like, okay, we'll replace it for you, but we have to wait until next fall when they all ship, and then, we'll send it to you then. And the other day I woke up and I was like, I wonder if I'm going to get that tree. I wonder if they're still in business. I wonder if there's any trees coming from China. And sure enough, I got my email today from them saying we're getting ready to ship your tree out. I was like, oh, message from the universe, Christmas.
I don't know why, like, I can't wait to put it up. Like, I almost want to put it up now to have some bright light in the house and be like, something is happy.
Yeah.
I vote for early Christmas. We need some happy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm usually a real stickler for like nothing until December, but I'm thinking this is going to go up before Thanksgiving.
Yep. I'm there.
So Suzanne probably is not on yet because I just forwarded her a link. I was just on with American University, was hosting a thing tonight with a guy, with John King, the former Secretary of the United States under Obama. He said something very interesting. They were talking about equity in education and what are some of the things that can be done sooner than later. And he said, and I said, we got to grip onto this. He said, citing a school is very important for equity. And all of he was talking about a lot of sort of more urban areas, but he said there's no, all of these districts came out with all of these proclamations of we support the BLM movement, but there's a huge disconnect between the proclamations and what's actually happening. And they were talking about, the big ways. And he said, the physical schools themselves play a big piece of this. And I thought, oh, we gotta talk about that publicly. Especially when you think about who is fighting the schools.
Amanda might end up coming in as an attendee because she didn't have a link. I have to ask Maureen to start sending her a link. I'm not sure. But because I don't see her yet, although she has gotten on before, so.
I just saw her name.
There she is.
Oh, okay.
We were talking about you, Amanda.
I was hoping you could get in.
I'm in. Had to make sure my hair looked good. Sorry.
Amy, that talk was so interesting.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. You know what? I would listen to John King talk anytime because I love listening to him.
Yeah.
He's so accessible.
Yeah. And like when you look at his resume, you think, oh my God, it's amazing that he's so down to earth.
I know, right? It's amazing he's where he's at. Like, giving his life.
Suzanne, new view tonight.
I'm in North Carolina.
You joined it?
Yeah.
Where we go, girl? That's awesome.
So, are you energized?
Fun day of canvassing today. Yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah. I mean, it's just hard work. It's kind of like, I'm by myself, but it's still fun. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I know.
So are you zooming from one room and he's zooming from another?
I have, there's like 4 different Zooms going on for different people that are here. So it's pretty funny. Yeah, giant house on the beach. It's great.
Nice.
I know.
What town are you in?
Wrightsville. Well, we're
Wrightsville, really?
Wilmington is where the work's getting done, but yeah, we're on the beach.
I so admire you and Peter and your family for taking action and getting
great.
things done.
Yeah.
It's-
So,
I don't know.
let's hope so.
I don't know if Rich is going to try to come down.
Oh my gosh, there's another one.
Yep, he might.
There's talkers and there's doers.
Uh-oh, those are fighting words.
It's a good
No, I'm just saying, like, I wish I could do. I think I'm a thinker and never do.
Well, I was just like, you sit home and I'm getting more and more stressed out. I was like, just do something.
I know.
Yeah, it feels like, even if it's not, it feels like it gives you a little bit of control over your life.
Yep.
Are we ready to go live? It's 6:58.
Okie dokie. Hit broadcast. Okay. So we'll still wait a few minutes to start.
Do you want me to go live on the channel on YouTube?
Yes, please.
Just gotta chill.
Yep, yeah, I see the numbers climbing. I do see in the attendee list, some members of your team, Pam, like Mary Beth Shea.
Yeah, they're just attending. They're not panelists tonight. Thank you.
I'm also just attending. I was just viewing. Can someone kick me back?
What? You want to leave us? Yes.
I'm in a sweatshirt right now.
You're looking fine on the screen, so no. Yeah, no one else from my team will be attending.
What do I do, LaTanya? Hit a withdraw to co-host permission?
Yeah, or you should be able to kick me to a panelist.
Hmm.
Well, it probably won't work till it starts, so I'll just hang out until you go live.
Well, we've started. It's just
Oh, okay.
Amy, you're live on the channel and on YouTube, and if you could just hit your record to cloud, we're in good shape.
All right.
All right. You're all set on my end.
Okay. Okay, it is 7 o'clock. I am going to call to order the Swampscott Public Schools School Committee meeting, regular session, Wednesday, October 28th at 7 p.m. This is a virtual meeting in accordance with the executive order issued by Governor Baker on March 12th, 2020, suspending certain provisions to the open meeting law. And I am going to start in with some community announcements. So Suzanne, do you want to start? Before you do, I don't see our school, I don't see our student reps here tonight.
I don't either.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I do not miss them. Okay, Suzanne, sorry to interrupt you.
I don't have necessarily an announcement other than like happy to see kids on Monday and Tuesday running across the field, getting into school, and then bursting out. So happy. I was there at the end of the day on Tuesday, and it was just really nice. It finally felt closer to normal. Anyway, can't wait to hear how it's going. That's it.
John?
Thanks, Amy. Actually, I just wanted to comment on, as many of you know, I have a student in the middle school, and she was back in school earlier this week. And the kids were cleaning their own desks, cleaning their own chairs. And, you know, I saw Mr. Kalishman in that video doing the same, and thought that was great. And I just thought it was really great that the kids are participating in their own kind of community safety. You know, even at that, you know, just at the individual level, I thought that was really commendable. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Ted?
I would say a mix between what Suzanne and John said, and let's just make sure that we travel to and from school safe. Have your eyes out when you're operating your cars, and we get a lot of kids walking, especially around the high school with the Stanley 3rd and 4th graders there.
Karen?
Pretty much the same. Happy to finally be in hybrid. Seemed like it took forever and yet was fast at the same time. I don't know. But I had one child start on Monday and everything went great. And then I have another one starting tomorrow. They're on different cohorts, but they're happy to be doing that. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it's going to be fantastic. So feels like progress. That's it.
I don't have anything in particular to add, but what I do want to say is we are not having public comment tonight live. I want to acknowledge that to everybody who has signed on. A Google Doc went out last week, and we got well over, I think it was 50 questions. And the superintendent and her team, as well as some to the school committee, are going to be answered this evening. So we have found that this way we make sure that we're answering everything. There were some really good comments, a lot of questions, and I know that a number of the school committee members have spent a fair amount of time this week responding to and talking to parents throughout the district. You know, and I want people to know that we hear you, and all of the feedback is being passed along as appropriate. And I think we'll see tonight a lot of updates from the superintendent. So with that, I also want to follow up with, I wish that Myra were on with us tonight, because one of the comments, one of the offline conversations that was taking place this week relates to the Thursday rallies that are right outside of Hadley. Karen and I went down 2 weeks ago after we got a very upsetting phone call from a parent who was talking about her, she has a child with special needs who is really traumatized by what's happening outside her window. That has nothing to do with politics, but an incredibly noisy event that's taking place there every every Thursday. So Karen and I went down, and while we were there, we saw some of the selectmen. We saw the chief of police and the chief of fire, as well as Officer Delano. I'll refer to you as officer since you were there in your legal capacity. You know, and it's really upsetting. It's been very upsetting to see it, not only from the nastiness that is being said, but just from a learning perspective and how loud it is and how disruptive it is. Unfortunately, and I've had a number of conversations offline with both Myra as well as a number of parents, the superintendent and myself met with, at our tri-chair meeting with the head of the selectmen as well as our town manager. And at the moment, there really isn't much that we can do about this. I will say, as we were logging on tonight, I could hear what was happening over on a parallel conversation with the select board about noise. So I'm confident that the right people are around the table, hoping to make some changes to better protect our kids and make it a safer, quieter learning environment. But I just want to acknowledge that that there are a lot of conversations that are happening offline to remedy what's really a disruptive situation. So with that, Superintendent, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I do want to echo what everyone said. To see students and teachers in the buildings, and even though it was probably half capacity, I don't think it's ever brought me as much joy as it did to see those kids coming out of the cars. I was outside the middle school with Mr. Kalshman, and the kids were directed to the hand sanitizer that was on the brick walls to do it before they walked in the schools. I've learned to recognize smiling eyes of students, and everyone was enthusiastic and happy. And I think Mrs. O'Connor, you told a story of a parent that reached out to you, and when they asked their children how school was, they just said awesome. So it was a great feeling. It felt better than it's felt in 8 months in those buildings. And so I just want to echo that it was a great start. But a lot of great questions came in. We are going to address them in a slideshow tonight, a slide presentation. But before we get into that, I do have some items I'd like to update the committee on. There is no written superintendent's report because we've been so busy. I haven't written, but I will get it posted and shared. Mrs. Mulcahy organized the second round of staff COVID screening last week, and of the 326 tests that were taken, all was negative, and all were negatives, and there was one retest. So that is our second round where we've had no positive cases come forward. And I know it's a moment in time, but it's something that I think is great to continue for our staff and for the safety of everybody. The other shout out I want to give is that there is a notice that went home to K-2 parents and guardians and families regarding a technology training tomorrow night at 7 p.m. on iPads in their learning platform of Seesaw. Their notice did go home with the Zoom link. However, it also is being recorded, and it will be accessible to parents on the SBS Family Help webpage. But if anybody does not have that link and is on this call and would like to attend, they certainly can call my office and we can get that to you. But that is being offered tomorrow evening. I encourage parents and families and guardians and caregivers to attend, if you're not unfamiliar with the iPad use and this particular platform of Seesaw. The next item I want to talk about, Amy?
I was just going to say, it would be great if the principals could send that out so that the requests aren't coming into the super's office.
Well, it already went home, so everyone should have it. I'm just saying, on the off chance one or two people that are on this attending tonight didn't have it, I don't want all the K-2 parents calling, but it did go home. So make sure, and maybe we can, by the end of this meeting, figure out where it could be posted so people could access the link.
That'd be great.
The other item I wanted to discuss is that I've been invited to, as a superintendent of a Metco district, to be part, and I volunteered to be part of a racial equity working group. I'm going to read the goal of this committee so that I don't mess it up. The goal of the committee is to support Metco headquarters in formulating an anti-racist vision for the greater Metco community, encompassing school districts, students, suburban community members, and Boston families. So I just want the committee to know that I volunteered to be part of this temporary group, that our first meeting is tomorrow morning, and that I will keep the committee involved and informed with whatever comes out of these meetings. So that was an item. The third thing I wanted to talk about is snow days. I know I've had a couple of individual conversations with committee members, but I haven't brought it to the full committee. What you should know and what the community should know is that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education guidance is that it's a local decision. And it's really funny to see, to speak to my colleagues where everybody's position is, because not everybody, a good number of superintendents felt, well, we have experience with remote now, so those snow days should be remote days. And I want to explain my thought process and where I'm at with this decision right now. I do agree we have a robust remote program and we could easily flip those days to remote. I also feel that with our current model, every learning opportunity is important, and so we need to consider that. At the same time, I struggle with the feeling that so much has changed for our students and our children, and so many traditions are being altered during this pandemic that I hesitate to take away the joys of a snow day call. It's an opportunity for students to sleep in, stay in their pajamas, then get outside and either play or shovel snow for their parents or shovel snow for their neighbors or make snow angels. So there is that part of me that struggles with, are we taking everything away from our kids? So the other thought I have on this is it's really going to be dependent on the weather conditions. If a nor'easter is predicted to come in with high winds and heavy wet snow, and there's an opportunity for power outages and internet access issues, do I really want to call a remote day with people being more stressed when they lose power or they have accessibility issues? So right now, my plan is to call it on a case-by-case basis. I'm not completely opposed to calling a remote snow day. But at the same time, I do struggle with allowing our children to be children and at least have something a little normal and predictable and a little joyful that snow day call. So I put that out to the committee as my initial thoughts, and that's kind of where my leadership team as well, they agree. As I said, it depends on the weather, but I'm not going to put the stress on families to have connectivity issues and power issues with heavy winds and wet snow and power lines possibly going down. So I put that out to the committee. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to chime in. Karen?
I was just going to say, is it fair to say that you don't have to decide one way that you're going to go? You can, like, if we have a lot of snow days, you could decide we're losing too many and they can be remote. Or
Absolutely. And that was my initial thought. We were, as a team, we're talking like maybe if we hit 4, we start going remote. But I really think it's important to consider the type of snow that we might get. You know, is it just, I think there's a lot of considerations, but I do not have to make a decision one way or the other. It is a local decision and we can go storm by storm or day by day, so. Okay. So this brings us to the community questions that were really good. We grouped them into categories, excuse me, of health and safety, teaching and learning, and special education. We'll be sharing our answers through a PowerPoint tonight, and then turning the document into a frequently asked questions document to be posted, because I do think it's a good place to house any questions, because there were some that were repeated. And if they were repeated just in this one Google sheet, then certainly more than one person has the same question. So it might be a great reference sheet for a frequently asked questions document. Before we begin the PowerPoint though, I would like to update you on a call we had with the commissioner yesterday. Commissioner Riley is the Commissioner of Education out of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It was a brief phone call in terms of time and length, but it was pretty meaty. And there are some things that I've shared with union leadership yesterday, and then with my leadership team today. And some of it ties into the questions that were posed in the Google Sheet. So a lot of the questions were around, when are we going to decide to go fully remote if our community is red? And up until tonight's meeting and a few meetings I had today, the guidance we were following was the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's guidance that when your community is in the red zone for 3 weeks, you would go remote. That guidance is changing as we learn more about the virus. And the guidance now is that if your community is in the red zone for 3 weeks, then we need to look where the transmission is within the community. If our transmission and our numbers and our red zone in our town of Swampscott, the clusters are, say, at the Bertram House, I'm using that as an example, and it's not transmitting within the schools, then we're not closing school and we're not going fully remote. We would remain in hybrid. So it's really about contact tracing and figuring out where their transmission is occurring within the community. And so they are now stepping back on that guidance and saying, as long as the transmission is not occurring within the schools, schools can remain in their hybrid model. So that was a question that came up a lot. Amy?
So, but I just want to clarify, when you say, as long as that means it's not happening within the schools, does that mean that, that does not mean that if we do have cases in school, that it will close? It just, it's just another data point. Because
where are the clusters? We're bound to have a case in the schools. I mean, it is inevitable. But if it's not large numbers, large classrooms, shutting down a school, which we're not, if we have a positive case, we have a protocol, we're not shutting down a school. So I think this is coming from possibly Andover, and Martha Seiba could correct me, where Merrimack College is. And they've turned red because they have Merrimack College there. And that's where there's a cluster, and that's raising or changing the zone of the community. So this is coming from, I think, more specific directives in other communities where there's hospitals, where there's nursing homes, where there are colleges. And so how can the school department now flip back to remote when it's really not being clustered within the schools, it's being clustered at these other facilities, if that makes sense. Karen?
Beyond that, it also could be community spread that's not school-based, right? So it could be 10 random people in the community, but that's not related to the schools, it's not traced back to the schools, et cetera. So I don't want to act like if we don't have that asterisk on the color code, that again doesn't mean that there's something automatic. It just means that we're going to look at what's going on in the town and make a decision.
Right? That's right. We're digging a little deeper. We're no longer just saying, oh, this is week 3, next week we go remote. We're not. There's going to be time spent figuring out where that all is coming from and where that data is. The second thing that was talked about is that the commissioner is getting lots of pressure from his Board of Education in terms of live Zooming and live streaming and potentially making it a regulation. And we have prepared union leadership with that directive that if it comes down, I said to my team today, I hope it comes down with money to help us do what we need to do. But that is a very distinct possibility. The third thing.
Can I ask a question about that? Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Other than it could potentially become a regulation and that school districts would be mandated to do it. That's all I know at this time.
Pam, did he give any timeline where this possibly might happen?
When we're on the calls with the commissioner, he mentions that coming soon, but he doesn't give us a specific time frame. For example, one of the other issues that came up is, I don't know how, well, I do know how we found out. Apparently some districts we're looking, and this was another question that came up in the community questions. How are we planning to bring back our students and keep them safe after the Thanksgiving break? So it's my understanding that some districts and their school committees decided that they were going to go 2 weeks remote following Thanksgiving to make sure and mitigate any transmission from somebody who traveled. Well, somehow the commissioner got a hold of that information, and we got a directive from his chief of staff that said, you are not to do this. If you do this, it will result in an audit of your school district. You should not be making this decision. It is not advisable. More information to come on that. So, Mr. Giantis, the answer to that is more to come. You know, we're not having these calls with the commissioner every week. There's pretty much every other week now, but I hope as we approach these situations and they start coming in a timely way that we have timely information for everybody.
Okay, thank you for that context. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
I don't know if I should sit on this and it'll be covered in your the rest of your questions, but why wait for the commissioner to bring that?
We're not. We
Okay.
are currently running some live Zooming now, which leads me to the last point. And as I said to my team jokingly today, there were 607 of us on the call. And in some ways, I felt like he was talking to Swampscott because he was so specific about some of these things. But what I recognized is that we're not alone in our decisions, and that he was speaking to decisions that have been made in many districts, because we did submit our plans and clearly somebody read them and delivered the patterns and trends that are happening in communities. Because the next item he talked about is the 2-1-2 hybrid model that we're doing and how it's not working. And we're not alone in that. And what they talked about is what we've been concerned with, and that is the amount of asynchronous learning that occurs in this model. And so what he was talking about and what we spent a lot of time talking about as a leadership team today is moving to a 3-2 model, which means cohort A would be in 3 days, cohort B would be in 2 days. The following week, cohort B would be in 3 days, cohort 2 would be in 2 days. What he was saying is that his medical boards that are consulting with him are saying that sanitizing and cleaning day or deeper cleaning on Wednesdays is not necessary, because we are sanitizing and we are cleaning every single day. That hasn't come yet, but to your point, we were talking today about not waiting for the directive to come, regardless of his timeline, that perhaps we should push this out on our own. I mean, we're only not even through a week of our hybrid currently, but I see Suzanne agreeing that, you know, there's no reason we can't do this. And that's going to be touched upon in our presentation tonight. But those are some things that we wanted to talk about. The third thing, or the fourth thing at this point, that came up on that call, and that was also in the questions tonight, was about the CDC's change in guidance of what a close contact is. So up until this point, a close contact was somebody who was within range of somebody for 15 minutes, even with a mask on. And it was consecutive 15 minutes. CDC has changed its guidance to 15 minutes cumulative in a 24-hour period. However, so the question came up with the commissioner, do you anticipate CDC changing their guidance from 6 feet? And the commissioner acknowledged that DESI's guidance was 3 feet to 6 feet, but also recognized that apparently the majority of our districts in the Commonwealth have selected to stay with that 6-foot guidance, which is what this committee decided to do. And so if you're maintaining that 6-foot guidance, then 15 minutes in a 24-hour period cumulative is not going to change things for us. So what we emphasized today at the leadership team meeting is the principals are reminding people to maintain that social distance of 6 feet, but the teachers have to do it as well, because what we're seeing is natural behavior for students when they go out for their mask breaks. They feel a little bit free and they're forgetting to social distance. So it is a message that all of our educators need to continue to send to keep us safe and to keep our schools open, that we can do this because this committee has voted to maintain that 6-foot distance. There are schools that are at the 3-foot, that have newer buildings. There are districts that are at 3 foot, that have newer buildings, larger classroom spaces, therefore they're getting more kids in. And that's some of our challenges here. We are 6 feet in older buildings that have less square footage, therefore we can't bring more kids in, if that makes sense. Okay.
All right, I have a question. Are we gonna talk about this more later, or?
We have some health and safety answers, but what in particular?
That's fine. No, it was kind of to Amanda about the health and safety, so maybe she's gonna cover it later, so I'll wait.
Yeah, so why don't we go through the answering of the questions, then we can circle back. So there's a couple of items I'd like to clarify to the committee, and for the community. Number one is there is nothing I want more than for all our students to return back full-time for in-person instruction. But it's just not possible at this time, and I'm going to explain through our presentation why and the challenges we face. Secondly, if I'm completely honest, and people might think that the timing of this is curious, but the truth of the matter is, if we voted for a new elementary school in 2014, we would not be facing the challenges as a district that we're facing during this pandemic. Our old facilities are dictating what we're able to do right now, and they're limiting our choices. And so some of that I will explain to you. The final item I want to clarify is the communication comments I saw within the community questions. I am very well aware that there are 2 schools where the communication has been lacking or lagging, that it is very last minute, that it has been challenging for parents to plan, and it's not okay. And we've had the discussion. It's not acceptable, and you should expect better. I want to explain to you how communication happens, because I'm not sure everybody understands. And for those that don't know, I was an elementary principal in this district for 8 years. I'm not sure some of the newer families know that. When we make decisions, and when we've made decisions from the get-go for our phased approach and our decisions that are made as we move plan to plan, they are not made in isolation. There is the organizational chart of the district is such that there is a central office team made up of myself and my directors. That's the director of finance, the director of teaching and learning, the director of technology and innovation. They are all, and my occupational health nurse. That is at the central office level team. Then there's the leadership team that has the director of facilities, that has all of the principals, all of the assistant principals. Both of these teams meet, first of all, the central office team meets separately every week. And then the central office team combines with the leadership team, and we meet for another 2 hours. This is 4 hours a week that we're meeting, we're planning, we're collaborating, we're turning over ideas, and they're being notified of all of the things that have just happened in my life in terms of the calls of the commissioner. From that, it's the responsibility of the school leadership to implement and communicate these plans to their community. And the reason for that is each school is unique. Central office can't send the detailed plans for 5 schools when the facilities are different, the school buildings has different challenges. That comes from the leadership of your schools. And so any communications that are going to come from my office are going to be bigger communications, broader communications, but it's really important because every school in our district is a unique community and a unique culture and a unique structure. And that message has to come from the building level. And so I just think it's important to understand that there's different layers of leadership in our district. There's different layers of decisions and responsibilities. And I just want you to know where that one lies. And with that,
Pam, can I say something on that?
sure can.
I think some of the parents that have echoed about that communication are 100% on point. And I think as a community, as a school committee member, that communication should be coming, like you said, from the leader of that building, not from the administrative assistant, not from anyone else. And it would make everyone's life a bit easier. And when there are situations like this that we are living right now, to have it right at your tablet or right at your computer is much easier. And if we were at an A+, I would still strive to recommend that we are at an A+ every day. Of course, some days are going to be more involved than others, but I think the parents are on point in regards to the specific buildings. And I was a little bit dismayed when I saw a communication that was sent out from an administrative assistant, and that school needs to do better. Thank you for looking at that, Pam.
Message has been given, and I do understand it, but I think it's important to understand that I was there, and this committee knows that I was a teacher in our district. I was a principal in our district. I was assistant superintendent in our district. I was even an aide in our district before I was a teacher. I understand the responsibilities, but, and I understand that and I've said this to my team, I was not a principal during the pandemic. So I know that things have changed, but I know that when they left our leadership team meeting today, the expectations are that we don't know when these changes are coming, but you need to start planning for them now. You need to start communicating them now, because they could happen next week, they could happen in 2 weeks. I don't know when they're happening, but communications to families have to go out sooner so that families can plan realistically. When we decide to go to this 3-2 model, if we decide to go to this 3-2 model, we need to give parents enough time to set up their own lives, their children's lives, and to adjust to it. So the message was loud and clear in the email communications I received and the community responses and questions that were put on that document. And so just know that those conversations have been had. And now I'm going to share my screen with the chair's permission and show the presentation. Oh, I don't have abilities. Can you make me a co-host?
Sorry, I will. Sorry.
That's okay. I should have asked earlier. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, what does it say? I signed out. This happened last time. Let's just verify it's me. It is me. Okay. I'm just going to move you all. So we're going to start with health and safety. And these these questions were grouped together, and our occupational health nurse, Amanda Mulcahy, is going to answer these. I probably will likely chime in. Oops, did just get, wait a minute.
Hey, going the wrong way.
I don't know, my computer's, this one desktop is acting funny. Here we go. Okay.
All right, so I just want to thank everybody for their questions. You know, I think it's important to ask these questions and also important for you guys to know the information. So a lot of the questions were kind of repetitive, so we did pick out most of them that and just kind of combined them. So you just know that. But so the first question is, how will mask breaks be handled? So the face mask breaks may occur in circumstances listed below when the appropriate physical distancing is enforced. So that's outdoors during physical education. This information you can find in the school committee's EBCFA page 4. The mask breaks are scheduled, they're scattered, and they are managed by the principals and encouraged to be outdoors as much as possible.
So to add to that, we had a deeper conversation today that regarding the tents, the outdoor spaces we have, because a lot of the schools are using the tents for their mask breaks and snack breaks outside. And so we talked about the fact that, you know, the tents are also going, when there's no official date that those tents are going to be broken down and stored. Right now, the tents are going to stay up as long as we possibly can. Once we get heavy snow, we don't want them damaged. We have invested a lot of money in them and they'll be taken down. So the question that was asked was, well, where do we go for mask breaks? And I'll say it here, that there's no space in some of our buildings to do it in large areas. So we encourage and we've asked the principals to remind families that if it's raining, dress your children accordingly. Put on a raincoat, wear rain boots. If it's snowing, hats, gloves, mittens, because whether or not there's a tent, going outside and taking a quick walk around the building is going to be your mask break. And so there doesn't have to be a tent for you to have a mask break. So we just need to send those reminders, principals need to send those reminders to families to make sure that kids are dressed for the weather and prepared for anything.
Okay. All right, one of the questions was, can a face shield replace a mask? And that's no. All individuals in school buildings, on school grounds, and on school transportations and common spaces when physical distancing is observed are required to wear a fitted face covering that covers the nose and the mouth. That's in the school committee. You guys voted that, and that's something that we stand by. So
the other thing, the only time we have talked about using face shields is when there's in-person learning occurring in the classrooms and teachers are going to go close to a student for one-to-one. We have requested and provided shields so that they can not only wear a mask, but wear a shield for that brief amount of time that they might be directing that student. So it's not a replacement, but it might be used by a teacher with a mask to get closer than that 6 feet to help adjust something for a quick moment.
Why is it mandatory for children to get the flu shot? It wasn't mandatory last year, and that's right. This is a new mandate from the state that we have to follow through with. It's something that we also have to have documentation. It must be filed with the school nurses. I did put the resources in there for the MassGov about the immunizations, and also the CDC about vaccinations. So we have to follow this mandate.
And the other thing I would say that I learned yesterday was that this is a mandate not only for hybrid students, but even our fully remote students. It is a mandated immunization by the state now. So even if students are working remotely, they still need to turn in their paperwork that they've been vaccinated unless they have a medical or religious excuse.
Yeah.
So
and those documentations you can find also on our website under the health service tab. You can find the resources to file those medical or religious excuses. So just so you all know.
Perfect.
So a big question is 3 feet versus 6 feet apart. Why are we not following DESE's guidelines that allows 3 feet to be okay? What are the rates of infection in schools that have 3 foot rules versus 6 foot? So as we talked a little bit prior to this, the school committee has approved the 6 feet policy, which is also in regulate. So it's what I want to say is that as you guys approved the 6 feet, that is actually in line with the CDC and the DPH's regulations. So, and especially with this new CDC regulation of the 6 feet for longer, it's really a big point right now to stay that 6 feet. So that's why it's the 3 versus the 6. It's for the best.
I don't think we have the data on what the infection rate in the schools that are at 3 foot are. I have some anecdotal data from my colleagues that are doing it, and it's not favorable, but it's not hard and fast data. Amy?
Pam, you had also said something to me at some point about when you and I talked about the 3 versus 6. About the nature of our classrooms, particularly in the older buildings, that having the wider, that staying with the 6 feet means that there are less people in the classroom, which helps to our aged HVAC system to be working better. Or
Right.
not be working better, but to be working properly. Whereas having more bodies in that could impact it negatively.
Correct. So our director of facilities, Max Casper, just emailed me prior to this meeting and talked about the forthcoming more reports from LBA and an updated floor charts that will be coming from them in the coming weeks, and the occupancy rates that will be revisited, whether they stay the same or changed. So it's true. You know, one of the things that we'll get to after the health and safety is why are we not full day versus half day, and some of the challenges that we're facing with our facilities and with our HVAC systems. So we'll get to that.
Question, do we know how many districts are using the 3 feet?
I have not taken the time to ask that. I do have a colleague that I'm relatively close to that is doing the 3 feet, and we actually had a conversation Monday night, and she is facing challenges. I just lost your faces. I don't know.
What kind of challenges?
A lot of kids being sent home for cases, positive cases.
So in other words, the closer they are, the more kids.
That's my only anecdotal story.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, she mentioned to me 3 classrooms in one day that already were having issues. But they have larger classrooms because they're in newer buildings. So I don't have any hard and fast data. I certainly could have Amanda, do a little research with DPH or even DESE and see if there's any numbers out there that talk about what districts selected. There could be a chart and we can find that, or at least look for it if the committee wants.
I think it would be helpful to know. There are, it's a question that has come up often. And when we took our vote, it was several months ago, and it seemed a fairly obvious vote, I think, if everybody would agree to that.
But Amy, we also.
Hold on a second, but that things have changed over the last couple of months as as it has since the beginning of this pandemic. So now I think the time is definitely right to look and see if we're still.
But then you're creating an issue for the new CDC guidance in terms of 15 minutes.
I was just going to say that. So if we were to move the 3 feet, then we're going into within the 6 feet. So now we're talking about if a case was to enter into the schoolroom in that classroom, everybody would be possibly considered a contact.
A close contact.
A close contact, which means that whole class would now have to be home for at least 14 days. So the safest thing to do is to socially distance the 6 feet and more if we can.
So I was thinking completely opposite, Amy. I was thinking that as we enter the next 12 weeks of flu season and common flu, that, wow, I feel pretty good that we're still at 6 feet. because that prevents us from sending whole classes home to be remote.
Well, I'm sure the teachers would also agree with you.
Probably.
Ted, I saw your hand raised. Did you?
Oh,
I was going on the same thing when you began speaking in regards to some of the ages of the building and so on, what you were talking about.
Suzanne,
So
did
I
you-
Suzanne, I had cut, you and I were
Yeah,
talking.
you know what, Amy, I was just going to say exactly what Amanda said. I was just going to refer to the fact that we were using the DPH and the CDC guidelines when we picked that, not the DESE. And I was going to, agree with her that, or tell you that the CDC guidelines and the whole 15 feet of, the 15 minutes consecutive or not consecutive anymore minutes would be an issue. So, I mean, I feel comfortable with the 6 feet.
I think it's good to point that piece out so that people know it's not just that, the answer isn't just that that's what we picked and that's what we voted on, but that as we continue to talk about this, and if we do talk about the 3 feet, because I think it's a conversation that we're going to have going forward, at some point we're going to have to move there, but right now, the guidance, it would almost hurt more if there were a case. So that's just the kind of thing that we have to weigh against trying to move forward. Making that decision could actually put us backwards. So I just want people to know where the thinking is and how we're coming up with the decisions versus just that we made them. And
no, we followed, DESE went to 3 feet to 6 feet. Make your decision. And as I said, way back when, some districts went 4.5 feet, but CDC is not wavering on that 6 feet. If they're not wavering and they're now saying it's 15 minutes cumulative in a 24-hour period, we are safest and our kids and our staff are safest at the 6 foot distance. Not to mention what you're saying in terms of occupancy. I don't think it's going to change. If we go 3 feet, our ventilation is not going to allow us to do 3 feet because we would be over capacity in our occupancy levels that have been determined to this date, as of this date. So, Amanda?
Okay, so why does the town believe that a negative test result in kids being kept home for 10 days? Research shows false negatives are extremely rare and opposed to the false positives. Swampscott Public Schools, we really do believe that it is good practice and the safest measure for our schools that we do keep individuals experiencing COVID-like symptoms home for a period of 10 days. This is to ensure that although individuals who may have received a negative PCR test, they are not entering the school with a false negative. The available data right now from CDC indicates that a person with mild to moderate COVID-19 symptoms do remain infectious no longer than that 10-day symptom onset. But I think it's important to mention that if these individuals can present an alternative diagnosis for their symptoms from a physician and with a combination of a negative PCR test, they're allowed back in schools. We want people to be back in schools, but we just want them to be safe.
So for example, if somebody were to come and say, I had a negative test and my doctor said I have a sinus infection, that's an alternative diagnosis. If they can provide that with their negative test, they can come back into school. We just need, and I'm not sure if families are aware of that, we just need that alternative diagnosis. And
when did this go into effect?
So this was updated October 15th, I think it was. I can look at the date and get back to you on that, but it was posted on our website. And I think it was sent out in a district-wide email.
So if a child has allergies and the family calls the nurse and they tell them to stay out and they do the PCR test and a doctor's note, they should be allowed back in.
Yes.
Yep.
Is that expressed to the nurses?
Yep.
District-wide?
Everybody.
Yep.
I have weekly meetings with the nurses and everybody is on the same page and we all understand that if if a doctor has an alternative diagnosis for the symptoms that are presenting and they can present a negative PCR test, then they can come back to school.
Mr. Delano, it could, let her find out the date that we actually updated this, because I'm sensing that there could be something going on here that we want to make sure we have the right date.
Yes, I think that would be good.
We will follow up on that.
I will get back to you on that one. I
Yes,
promise.
I can definitely see that we need to find out some definite information.
So I just want to be clear here, because there's so many scenarios. If my child is in a classroom with somebody else who is positive,
It's symptomatic.
and my child does not have any COVID-like symptoms, and they have had a PCR test, they do not need to stay at home for 10 days.
So if your child is not symptomatic, then there's no reason for your child to not be in school, unless for some reason they are declared by MAVEN or DPH to be a positive contact person.
What's MAVEN?
But wait a minute, I'm trying to verify my language with Amanda. Because they're not in close contact, because they're 6 feet apart.
Right.
Okay. What's MAVEN?
MAVEN is the database that contact tracing goes through.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so I think a lot of parents are really like concerned about this, right? So when we say presents a symptom, like if you take a sip of water and you start coughing, that's not a COVID symptom, right? Like if you choke on your water and you're.
So that would go back to in the policies that in the protocols that we sent out, there's a list of symptoms, COVID-like symptoms that we are indicative of COVID-19. If the individuals have those, they will be sent to the nurse's room, and then from there they would be sent home. Or if an individual is at home and they're experiencing those symptoms, we're asking you not to come to school that day.
However, as I've said to my entire staff, I've had a runny nose since May because of allergies. I know it's allergies. I have been screened twice with a negative screening. So there is some common sense. If somebody takes a sip of water and coughs, they're not going to be sent to the nurse's office immediately. That's what you asked?
Yes. And also some of the symptoms are in combination with other symptoms, right? So because honestly, everything is a COVID symptom. So I just want to make sure that, we're not sending every kid home for everything, because kids get a stomach ache, kids need to go to the bathroom, and you know what I mean? Not everything is necessarily a COVID.
We talked about the three most prevalent, Amanda, we talked about the three most prevalent symptoms. Didn't we talk about 3 and said what we put in our COVID protocols is 2 or more and out the door?
So that's what I was just going to mention, is that we're really going by the standard of if someone is presenting with 2 or more of the symptoms that are on the COVID list, then that is an indication that we want them out the door. So, if I have a fever and I all of a sudden have a sore throat, that's 2 of the items on the list, and we're asking that child to go home. So if I just have a runny nose, which is my normal runny nose, something to watch. But if I have a runny nose and all of a sudden I spike a fever, then those are 2 symptoms, and we want you to go get tested.
Okay.
And do our nurses feel confident that, I would imagine that it's hard as a teacher to be in a classroom with 10, 12 other kids and, obviously not trying to diagnose themselves. They feel confident you just send them off to the nurse's office and they'll take care of that?
So it initiates, I guess. So if this child is in the school, in classroom, and they start to get sick, the first step is to call the school nurse and then tell the school nurse what's going on, because we don't want an influx of students just coming to the nurse's station all at once. So it really starts with a phone call first, and then the nurse will take all the information and make that decision from there.
So kids are not getting sent by the classroom teacher down to the nurse's office because we have occupancy limits and the nurses' spaces as well. So now we've put in place the procedure where there's a phone call from the classroom teacher to the nurse with what's going on. A decision is made whether or not a next step is taken.
Ted, I see your hand up.
I think it's still up from before.
Oh, okay.
So one of the questions was, with the Boston Public Schools deciding to suspend their in-person learning due to COVID, positive rate increasing to 5.7%, what is the positivity rate percentage for COVID-19 that Swampscott will use to determine whether that we should continue in-person learning? It's true that this positivity rate is a good indicator when it comes to making various decisions in the town and city jurisdiction. However, we, the Swampscott Public Schools, will determine our closures based on a collaboration between DPH, Board of Health, and the DESE regulations.
And what we said previously about contact tracing and where it's occurring.
Is there a plan for remote learning and quarantine students or students that have cold and flu-like symptoms to enable them to remote attend, participate, and benefit from in-person classes? We expect the children to participate remotely if they are feeling well. We think it's important. Obviously, if they're not up to it, that's understandable, but.
And we're also expecting teachers, if they're home quarantining and they're feeling okay, to be teaching. So we are expecting participation. It's just a matter of if you are positive and you're really, really sick, or if you're just quarantining and you're able to continue to teach or learn.
I would qualify this and say that this question might not be so much about the medical side of it, but as the learning side. Like what. How can these kids easily be switching back and forth between the hybrid versus the fully remote plan? Which I know that you and Dr. Bacon are going to talk about a little bit further on.
All right, so can you please explain your protocol for how the rest of the class will be treated when another student or teacher in the class has COVID? And this is such an important question, and I think it's really important that everybody understands that we did develop a very great protocol for when this scenario happens. And I'm sure it will happen and it will roll out as documented in our protocols. So once a community member is removed from the class from having COVID-like symptoms, the entire class will shut down for about 15 minutes. During this time, everyone will be removed from the classroom and an announcement will be made that over the speakers that cleaning protocols is in process. And the steps in cleaning and disinfecting that room can be found on our SPS cleaning handbook. And during that 15 minutes is when the room will be properly cleaned and disinfected. It takes about 10 minutes after the room has to be separated for 10 minutes, and then the room will be cleared and everyone will be able to return to that room. A notification will also be sent out of a possible COVID-19 in the school will be emailed.
So a couple of things I want to add to this that some of you know. We developed the cleaning protocols and process because we didn't want to say shelter in place, but we don't want people moving around the building. Because we presented collaboratively, Mrs. Mulcahy and myself and Max Casper, a cleaning training and a PPE training when cleaning in one of these scenarios to the custodial staff and the maintenance department. There is an entire protocol they need to follow in terms of putting on the proper PPE and how to take it off. And so all of that is happening while those students are removed from that classroom. And so I think it's important for the committee and the community to know that the custodial staff and the principals who are in attendance have been trained on what is to happen when this occurs. And it's important that we didn't use shelter in place because that's an entirely different announcement, but that we don't want students moving around. We don't want students moving around while they're trying to trace the steps of this person, because it may be that they go do the bathroom after they do the classroom. And so this is a very detailed and prescriptive protocol that's followed.
So the follow-up question to that was, how will the parents of the class be informed if the school committee member who was sent home is determined to be COVID-19 positive? Contact tracing will begin with DPH and the Board of Health. If your student was defined as a close contact with that community member who is now positive, then you will be notified with a second email from the school and then also by DPH. Okay. How will you keep each school and the district informed about the number of cases in the school? Although we can't give out specific numbers of positive cases related to privacy issues, that information is being tracked and shared with DPH on a regular basis. Also, as a requirement, this information is shared with DESE and reported to them as well.
It has to be reported. One of the things that Amanda created was a shared Google Sheet where all the building nurses input their information every day, and that the cases are tracked, the names are tracked. I don't have access to it, but on a weekly basis, Amanda gives me an update of maybe who we're following. But there is a very robust tracking system that is occurring and that all of the building nurses are contributing to.
So if there is a positive case in my child's classroom, I would be notified?
So you would be notified that there was a possible COVID-like symptoms in that room. And then if it was determined that that person that got sent home was positive for COVID-19, there would be a follow-up email only if you were determined as a contact person. So within
Close
that
contact.
close contact, excuse me.
Good question. So I'm a little confused because we're saying that we can't report numbers because of privacy HIPAA, which I understand. But in the previous slide, we said we're going to send an email or a school-wide notification every time a kid goes home with symptoms.
No.
No. It's not every time someone goes home with symptoms. It's the fact that when the students are being pulled out of that classroom for COVID cleaning, they're going to go home and tell their parents, oh my God, guess what happened today? We just want to let you guys know that this is what happened today. If it is determined that that individual that got sent home, no names are being identified, that person is positive and that your child that was in the classroom is now considered a close contact, you will receive another additional email from us, and then you'll be contacted by DPH as well.
So
Amanda, can I ask?
It's important to recognize that there are going to be kids who get sent home that may just have the sniffles, and that this is why there are 2 steps.
Exactly.
Okay.
Amanda, are we confident on that email, the second email? Would it be problematic to have a phone call? I mean, do emails vary that much? Do they change? Would it be easier for the parent to get a live body on the other end of the phone, or am I overthinking things?
So you will personally get contacted by the DPH. They are going to physically actually call you if it is considered that you are a contact, a possible contact of a positive case. So I think sending an email from our stance saying that we're following this as a contact is reasonable on our end, knowing that you will have to follow up with the DPH afterwards.
DPH also emails people rather than calling. I just wanted people to know that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I know we kind of talked about this prior, but how will we transition remote students back after Thanksgiving, or transition students back after extended illnesses or absences due to quarantine? And we talked about it, but it's really important that people understand that there are state regulations that need to be followed with traveling. So student employees are required to follow the state protocols regarding traveling. They're pretty detailed. And I put the link there so people can really look into it, because it's really important that they follow it.
Thank you, Amanda. Oops. Where am
I have a question. Is part of self-certification, doesn't that say something like I haven't traveled or I haven't gone anywhere? Is that part of it?
Yes.
Okay.
So will the district update its COVID protocols and scenarios responses to reflect the CDC updated definition to close contact as of 10/21, specifically of the 15 cumulative minutes of exposure, as opposed to the previous guidance regarding 15 consecutive minutes? So yes, we are updating our protocols, understanding that the virus is evolving and we're getting more and more information as it comes in. And we are working with DESE and DPH and the Board of Health to update these protocols. Once they are updated, we will be sending home an email and also putting them on the Swampscott, the public schools website. There is a link that says COVID-19 information. If you click on that, that has all of our updated protocols so far. So it's a really good resource if you do have these questions going forward to take a peek at and read.
So this is the question I was going to ask earlier. Has the Mass DPH actually adopted that new rule, or are they in the process, or is it already?
So I think that they're in the process if it hasn't already rolled out. I'm in contact with our public health nurse pretty regularly. So I believe that if it hasn't already come out, it's on its way out. So this is just kind of like a reminder, partnership and important role of the families. With the number of positive cases rising, Swampscott Public Schools feels that everyone has a critical role to play in the health of our community and our school's ability to keep students and staff in the buildings where they belong. The effectiveness of our efforts truly depends on our full community's use of precautions when they're not in our schools. We are asking students and families and faculties to please not send your children in if they're sick, because they will be sent right back home. Wear masks when in public and at gatherings where physical distancing is not possible. Please avoid large social gatherings and unnecessary travels. Self-quarantine for 14 days if anyone in your house has traveled to the areas. Please look at the Mass.gov travel order. It's really important. And most importantly, just create a plan for unexpected early dismissals in the event of illnesses. We also expect that as concerns arise, that you will raise them with us, and we want to help each family navigate through this new situation. And together we will get through this. It's really important.
I have another question. I'm sorry. I have a lot.
No, that's okay.
If, for instance, your child is a little off in the morning, and you're like, I can't send my kid to school sick, obviously, and so you keep them home, but nothing comes of it. They're not really sick. Do you know what I mean? They're not.
So
have any terrible symptoms. Can you send them the next day, or is the school?
So what we ask.
Sick?
Yeah, so what we ask right now is that if you're keeping your child home, if they're going to call out absent, that you please contact the nurse. Even if that is remote learning, we really want to stay ahead and track this. So if you're keeping your child home and they just have a runny nose that day, just give the nurse a call, talk it through with them. And if it does resolve, it is possible that they might be able to come back. We want to get children back in the building, but we can't do it unless we talk to you guys. So it's really important that you stay in contact with your school nurses and really just keep the communication open.
And a lot of the school nurses really know your children because of the visits and over the years, and they know you. And so by having a conversation of how, they're just feeling off, there are no symptoms, and that you just feel like the student should stay home and rest for the day. I mean, it is about communication. So
This is a very nitty gritty question. Does it make sense for us to relook at the phone system and if there is a way to opt into the nurse's office rather than going through the whole dial through directory? Because right now, for example, like at the middle school, when you call, you go, it goes to an absentee line versus going in and actually being able to talk to the nurse.
So right now we have a system in place where the absentee line is going to be taken by the school administrator or the secretary, and then they're actually directly taking that information and sending it to the nurse.
Okay.
So.
Good question.
Yeah. It seems to be working well.
Thank you, Amanda.
Welcome.
Okay, we're going to move on to teaching and learning. I don't know why this is happening. So I'm going to take this first one. It keeps bouncing. And that is, you please explain the rationale as to why it was decided to limit half-day elementary and middle school if we're employing the 2-1-2 model rather than 2 full days per week. This is where I want to talk about our facilities. So our high school is our youngest facility at 13 years old. Our middle school and elementary schools, when we look at the LBA facilities reports and the HVAC mitigation that has to happen, there are people and teachers who have been displaced from their classroom spaces. So we know that the 3rd and 4th grade at Stanley is up at the high school. And so what I need people to understand, for example, is the original plan for Stanley 3rd and 4th grade was that they would use the library. The library hasn't been cleared for use. So therefore they're at the high school. In addition to that, their cafeteria at Stanley has been divided into small learning spaces. So middle school, gym has 2 classes occurring in the middle school gym. There's 3 classes occurring in the middle school cafeteria on 2 different levels. So there's no space to serve lunch in those larger spaces. So then the question is asked, why can't students eat in their classrooms the way that other school districts are doing it? And the answer to that is, by the teacher contract, they are required to have a lunch period equal to that of a student. So if the teachers were the ones that were covering the classrooms while the students were eating lunch in school, there's not enough staff to supervise them and get their duty-free lunch period. So then the question even goes further. Why can't we bring volunteers in to watch those classrooms while the students are eating, to give the teachers their 20-minute lunch period? And that is, quick numbers today, we would need 55 people to walk into the middle school. And part of our concern with that is that as a committee, you voted to limit the number of visitors in the building so that we're not bringing in outside people, and it's pretty, it's cleaned. So we have that challenge. We have the challenges of all of our spaces are being used. In addition, in the afternoons, we have 2 more high cohorts that we haven't brought back in. We haven't brought in our EL population, and we haven't brought in our disengaged population. And we're looking to utilize those times while we continue to figure out the facilities issues and mitigate the HVAC issues in order to utilize time appropriately for our students. So, I say it again, old buildings, old systems, and we're mitigating them the best we can. But we have displaced teachers. They're teaching in cafeterias. They're teaching in gyms. They're teaching with dividers. It's very unique circumstances we're in right now.
Could we investigate what it would cost? I would imagine it's probably harder at the middle school because of its size than it would be at the elementary schools. But could we investigate what it would cost to get proctors or somebody to cover? I would imagine that it's not necessarily one for every classroom, but like if it were staggered and there were 15-minute lunches, that you could, have 4 lunch periods and have a group of proctors moving from room to room. I'm really I don't disagree with the parents who are saying like this half day is just not enough. And I think as a district, I would be, if I want to look at what it would cost us to support having people in there so that the teacher could get out of the room for 15 minutes and the kids could eat and they could not be sent home at noon.
Okay. I think you hit on something that if we had the larger spaces, we could start 4 lunches starting at like 10:30 in the morning. We don't have those larger spaces.
But if we went into, for example, if they stayed in their classes, and like they just went in and said, okay, all of this grade is eating at this time. And so the proctors go into that room and then the teachers can leave, the kids can eat.
I don't know where you think we're going to get these proctors from. This is we had a hard enough time getting proctors into the classrooms to do the remote teaching. So are you talking about hiring outside bodies as floaters for lunch periods? So I'd like to discuss this further with you because I'm not sure where we're getting these bodies.
Okay.
We've negotiated with the teachers for some other things, but we didn't talk to them about this. Could we talk to them about, having their lunch in the classroom?
And losing their 20-minute lunch period?
Temporarily during these times to keep the kids in school longer. It's worth a conversation, I guess.
Okay.
Just putting it out there.
Another comment that was made in the community comments was that the remote students are an afterthought and that we're not providing social emotional support for them. Because in my October 22nd communication, I talked about how excited I was to provide social emotional support to the kids that were coming back in hybrid. And I just wanted to clarify, one of my top priorities since I've been in this position has always been the social emotional well-being of all of our students. And just because I said that statement and that communication doesn't mean there aren't supports in place for our remote learners as well. This is a very, very small sampling of what is occurring at every school, all 5 schools, with our remote learners, in addition to the in-person learners. But our staff and our principals have gone above and beyond with our guidance staff and our school psychologists and our school adjustment counselors to reach out and support individually our remote learners. So our remote learners are participating in advisory and morning meeting with their in-person peers. And advisory and morning meeting by nature is a socially, emotionally supportive activity. So that's one way. Counseling and intervention services are done remotely to address the needs of the remote students and increase the interaction with in-person peers when appropriate. We have inclusive lunch bunches. We are running some clubs and after-school activities that are running remotely. And we are working really hard to incorporate the SEL, which is social emotional learning, into the general education curriculum for all students. But more than that, there was a list of book clubs, of touch-based activities. So we are super conscious of the remote learners and supporting them because they're even more isolated. The other thing I wanted to mention is that if anyone feels that their child is struggling in a way that is not being addressed by the school, that we need you as parents and guardians and caregivers to reach out to the school, to send an email to the guidance, to send an email to the principal, to pick up the phone and call. We can't identify students the way you can identify your child's needs. And so we really implore you to connect with the school. If you're concerned with your child with particular issues, because it is our job to support all of our students, and we will do that. So as I said, there were pages and pages of the supports that are in place for our remote learners, but this is just a sampling of it. But I think the message I want to send is that you really do have to reach out to your school, your principal, call the school administrative assistant to get to the guidance counselor, to get to the adjustment counselor. We want to provide supports, but we don't know everything, and we're going to miss somebody if you don't reach out to us. So I would send that message and just say that I've never wavered from my commitment of social emotional support for our kids. I just simply was making a statement that it would be nice to provide some in-person social emotional support as well. So I just wanted to make that point.
Superintendent, do you know, are the clubs and activities, are they running at all levels? I know that there are some at the high school.
The high schools haven't even unfolded yet, but I was going to talk to Mr. Kalish and Ms. Sanborn about, are there any activities running at the middle school? We were just finalizing all of the activities at the high school. So the next step would to be bringing it down to the middle school.
Okay.
I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Bacon.
So when we looked at the questions that came from the community, by far the most frequent question, and I've received 15 questions, which were all variations on this particular theme, have to do with what's being taken, what steps we're taking to increase the amount of synchronous learning for students who are remote on any given day. So these are the things that we're doing at present. So we're piloting, as we've said before, some different sorts of live Zoom models, which will enable students to participate with their in-person peers synchronously. So we have a pilot program for that going on at all levels. There's teachers at the elementary, the middle, and the high school that are piloting some different models. We're carefully observing and evaluating those models to be able to identify what's really the best practice when you do that live Zooming with combining in-person and remote students. I think one of the misconceptions that's out there in the community is that somehow it would be better if students were just live Zoomed into the classroom all day long. There's no research to suggest that that is an effective educational model. So for example, I was discussing this with my elementary curriculum specialists earlier today, who were elementary teachers in the district. And they were saying, we can barely make an effective 20-minute lesson to engage our remote learners. It's very hard with younger children to sustain that kind of engagement through a screen. So it's really not best practice. And we're trying to figure out ways to increase it that does become effective learning for our students. But it's something that we need to study. There's nobody out there who has the answers to this. And certainly just live Zooming all day long is not an effective educational practice. Third, we're really reevaluating the hybrid schedules that we began with to identify opportunities, as the superintendent said before, to increase our contact time for our remote learners. So one of the first steps we're taking will be that next week, instead of a totally asynchronous Wednesday after morning meeting for our elementary learners, we're going to start bringing back some remote Zooms specifically for our remote cohort on Wednesdays, and that'll start next Wednesday. And a few weeks out, we're looking to further change our schedule to increase face-to-face time, both for remote learners and our in-person learners. So that is something we're consistently working on. But it does take time to do it well and to have the educational impact that we want it to have on students. Oh, before you go on from that, there's just a couple things that are related to that general theme that I didn't put up as questions, but I did want to address. Some people, there was one question that really was about what specifically are the synchronous times for remote learners. Right now, that can all be found in the Swampscott Public Schools hybrid plan, which is on our website, if you have questions about that. And another question was about why we don't have like special teachers that are just devoted to our remote students. And we don't have the staff to do that. We don't have enough staff to be able to pull a teacher out of the general circulation to just deal with remote students. We don't have enough staff, and there aren't high enough numbers of remote students so that we could then continue to serve our in-person students if we removed one of our teachers from the in-person roster. You can go ahead.
Ed and Amy have their hands up.
Go ahead.
I know in some other districts, especially at the older levels, that the asynchronous learners or the fully remote learners have been essentially farmed out to online schools. I've heard of, I think, the virtual high school. I've heard of a couple of different names. Has there been any thought to that so that they're, I don't know. I don't know the first thing about them. I don't know if they're more robust. Yeah. I don't know if they're less. I don't know if it gives our kids anything extra, the ones who are fully remote. I'll say that at the same time that I have only heard from parents in other districts who don't like that.
So DESE had a workshop back in August, which I attended, which there were 2 vendors that they chose for providing that kind of service to districts if we chose to do that. So both vendors gave presentations about what they offer, and I brought back that information to the leadership team, and we decided at that time that we were not interested in pursuing that as an option for Swampscott school students. If you go to an online school, you might be one of 100 students assigned to one teacher for a particular class. It's not something that our team felt represented the kind of education that Swampscott students are used to, or that our community would want for their students. So we decided not to pursue that.
Okay, appreciate that. Ted?
Dr. Begum, was that back in August that the training or the presentation was back in August?
Yes, I believe it was in August.
I kind of feel like the asynchronous, where I think we have to move a little on it. I see that there's 3 weeks in order to, make a decision on where we're going to move from it. But I think everyone can agree right now, it's anemic, and it's no one's fault, but I think we have to adjust on the fly to it. There was a gentleman that emailed out this morning that his child's Wednesday morning, it was done at 8:45, and he was left with the child. I mean, I hope we can do better, and we can move and adjust at a quicker speed than 3 weeks. And I think that online is something that, let's take a look at it again. What do we have to lose? Maybe something else has changed.
Well, I agree with you that we can certainly do better. But as the superintendent has said, it's extremely complicated to manage all the spaces, manage all the staff, meet everyone's needs. We don't have the human resources and the capacity to do it all and do it all well and do it all right now. So we are doing the best that we can to move forward in a thoughtful way with what we're providing for our students. So our focus has been for the past few weeks on getting students back into the building. There was a lot of work to be able to make that happen. It's been 2 days since we've entered that model. So I think we can take a little bit of time to get to the next stage.
And I would strongly urge that we can move quicker than we are right now. I mean, I hate when someone puts their own children into the mix on the education aspect, but I can tell you from a middle school end on a Wednesday, I dread. And if I can feel comfortable enough saying that out there on my end, I think I am not alone, and I think I'm in the majority on that. I would encourage out of the box thinking to get us going here.
Right, and we are trying and we're doing our best, and that's why we had conversations at leadership today about it, and I had conversations with my elementary curriculum specialist in the afternoon. And I just remind everybody that middle and high school already have remote schedules on Wednesdays that include the live Zooms that were there during their remote learning phase. It's the only one who changed the Wednesday schedule was the elementary when they moved from remote to hybrid. And we're working to ameliorate that. I saw Ms. Wright, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna. You just said what I was gonna say. I mean, I think that you know, if you're gonna put your effort anywhere, it would be in that elementary schedule, like you said, because they had Wednesday activities and now they sort of don't. It's like the hardest for those kids to manage the asynchronous learning on their own. So, I mean, to Ted's point, you know, moving faster would be great, but also just kind of moving faster in that direction, or with the youngest kids first, would be great. And I was going to just speak to Ted's like desire to relook at online learning. I looked at both those schools you sent us in August, and I agree with you that they don't represent the kind of education that we expect to deliver in Swampscott. I mean, one of the schools, I think had K through 12, and there was only 4 teachers, and just think like how many kids are using that service to, you know, and how many kids are in a class. And you imagine they hired a few more because of this pandemic, but it's just, I agree that student teacher ratio of just the online learning, even if that was great, even if the learning was quality, it just couldn't be with so many kids in an elementary or middle school class. So I think that we have to just make our model, what we're doing here, as robust as possible.
Yeah, and I do just want to chime in and say that there are live Zooms occurring at the middle school on Wednesdays. So I'm not sure why there's a dread of Wednesdays, but and also Mrs. O'Connor, Mr. Kalishman chimed in that they are working on getting activities up and running at the middle school. In particular, GSA, National Junior Honor Society, the yearbook, the chorale, and even trivia. Unfortunately, the math team, 3-time champions, will probably likely not run, but they already have started that process. So I wanted to circle back, and he did want the committee to know that.
That's great.
Okay. So why aren't we just sticking with a fully remote model? The person who asked this question, clearly the remote model was working for that family with that student, but I just wanted to share some data to say why we're not just staying fully remote. When we did the survey last week, 83% of our families chose hybrid over fully remote. And that's the same proportion that expressed that preference back in July before any of the details of exactly what hybrid or remote were going to look like when it came time were available. So clearly a majority of our families prefer a hybrid model to a fully remote model. Secondly, we're starting to collect some data that will show us how much learning is lost when students are fully remote. Just as an example, my colleagues, thank you for my colleagues at the high school pulling this together for me today. So right now at the high school, 143 of our 700 and some odd high school students have an F in 1 or more courses. That's compared to 91 last year when we were in person. That's a 57% increase in the number of students who are failing with a remote model this fall. And the state has encouraged us to prioritize in-person instruction because they recognize that in-person instruction is the best model to support student learning. So although remote instruction can be wonderful and it can work for many students and families, it's not something that is going to get us where we need to be for the majority of our students and families. One person had a question on time on learning, and did DESE change the 900 hours for elementary, 990 for middle and high? Yes, they did reduce the number of hours of learning proportionately because they reduced the length of the school year from 180 to 170 days. According to DESE, asynchronous learning does count toward our required hours because we are providing asynchronous activities for students to complete that should take them 6.25 or 6.5 hours a day. Between that and whatever they're doing for their synchronous instruction. Some people asked about where some aspects of our curriculum are at the moment. We are required to teach all our regular curriculum, which we are doing. At the elementary level, we chose to delay the start of our science and social studies curriculum because we knew that students, the foundational skills in literacy and mathematics suffered significantly last spring, and we wanted to give students those first few weeks of school to try to assess and catch up a little bit with their basic literacy and math skills, which are necessary components for when you go to teach science and social studies.
And when at our next school committee meeting, Dr. Bacon will be presenting that reading and math data from the spring when we first, the pandemic first hit, and we have briefly talked about in separate conversations, the data is not good and shows that our focus should be on English and math at this point, given the presentation she'll be doing at a future meeting.
Okay. Someone asked about if we've given any guidelines for teachers in terms of what we're doing with our asynchronous material. And I shared here links to all the guidance that either has been provided by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education or the guidance that we've put out back from March when we started remote learning on what our best practices in remote and asynchronous learning. With all that guidance and all that said, it is still very much a work in progress. We can do better, and our hope is that we will do better. But this is extremely challenging. There's no magic bullet. There's no one formula. We're, continuously reading the research, talking to our teachers, figuring out what's working, figuring out how we can make things better for all our learners. But we have provided significant amounts of guidance and expectations for what we expect from our educators. This was just a very simple question about how we're going to work around holidays and with the equity in terms of, my student is in person Monday, Tuesday, what's going to happen next week when we have Tuesday off. So in the sort of longer term, we're going to be making adjustments about those in-person days to try to equalize everything out. Family engagement. I thought this was a great question. What can families do to ensure that our students are engaged and not regressing? So these are some of the things that your families can do. As the superintendent mentioned, we're having our first family training on the Seesaw platform at the elementary level tomorrow evening. Again, we'll start recording these. We'll continue to do family trainings and with recordings so that we can post to the website to help you better understand what the expectations are for your students. It's really important that families work with their students to set a schedule for that asynchronous time. That's something that we can't do for your family. We don't know what your family's schedule is. We don't know when there's an adult available to help your students navigate this. That's something that, unfortunately, families will have to take on whenever their student is learning at home. Keep on top of your students' performance. For the middle school and high school, you can log on to Aspen at any time to see how your student is doing. And we encourage you to communicate with your student's teacher if you see grades that are concerning or missing assignments. Teachers, and especially some of the interventionists, are going to be reaching out to families to suggest at-home activities that you can do, simple at-home activities that you can do to support the things we're trying to do with your students in school, especially around catch-up learning. So if we contact you and say it would be really great if you could practice your, these 3 math facts with your students once a day for the next 2 weeks, if you can do that, that would be extremely helpful. And I just wanted to underscore that this really has to be a community effort. all of us have to work together. It can't be just families. It can't be just the schools. We really have to collaborate and work together if we're going to get our students through this with the best possible learning outcomes.
Thank you, Dr. Bacon. And now special education, Mrs. Raymond.
I just need to go to the next. There it is. So I think this was a communication, just a building out of one of our schools, because all of our students on IEPs are in school at least 4 days, and many are here 5 days. So I think this was just a communication issue. I just wanted to make sure that all families knew that parents of families who have children on IEPs know that our direct service in Grid C is being provided. Grid A is consultation. The only service that looks a little different is Grid B, because those are services that are provided in general ed classrooms. And since the schedule is so different, they're providing it a bit of a different way, but the liaisons are communicating with each family about how that's being provided. But all of our students on IEPs are able to be in at the least 4 days, and many are here 5. This was a question about the middle school, worrying about the time of the block because kids are going home at 12:30 and 6 periods are occurring now in a shorter time frame. When we were before the pandemic, it's a 52-minute block, and now it's a 45-minute block. That is a loss of instructional time for sure, and we know that, but we really tried to prioritize the in-person instruction. And as Ms. Angelakis spoke about, the difficulty providing lunch right now is it kind of impairing that ability to get the full day in, but it's something that we are working on, especially for our students with disabilities. Can we get them in for a fuller day? We are also looking on different ways to creatively make up those times, but our commitment is to make sure that we meet all Grid C requirements. I just want to note at the bottom that families should always reach out to the liaison, the team chair, or to me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about any questions regarding services too. So it's been a lot of jumps, but we've made it through.
And that is our last slide, I believe. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you, Mrs. Raymond. And bring it back to the group.
School committee, I wonder if you guys have anything in addition you guys want to add or ask, particularly based on the conversations that you may have had with parents over the last week or so, or your own.
I'll say a couple of things from conversations that I've had, and I know as the leadership and everyone that is in this meeting tonight, one thing that I think that we have to keep a finger on and realize that there are kids that are feeling a lot of anxiety. And I hate to say it, but there are some kids I think that are making bad decisions in regards to trying to communicate and processing the anxiety. And I think as a parent, as an educator, as just someone within the community, there's nothing worse than hearing about a kid that is in conflict and that is making improper decisions. And I know that we do have people in place, but I can tell you that the destructive decisions from the anxiety angle is something that is real, that we really should have on our radar. Some people think because we're Swampscott, we don't have that type of behaviors in our community, and we do. Just 2 takeaways that on the Dr. Bacon, thank you for that presentation. Pam, can we keep the 143 kids that have Fs up at the high school? And from last year, I was a bit dismayed initially on the kids that were disengaged, because I thought that that was the student himself or herself, but it could be just one class. So can we keep the kids that are not engaged and the 143 kids that have an F up at the high school, can we keep an update, or can I request that an update each meeting going forward on those?
That's part of the data that Mrs. Bacon or Dr. Bacon will be presenting to you. I think we can ask the high school to keep us updated on that information as the year rolls out. But we were looking at that data last week as a leadership team, and it was the Springs data, or was the current data, Dr. Bacon?
For which?
The disengaged
For the high school? Yeah, so the data we were looking at last week and that I'll share next week was the current levels of students who are struggling in multiple classes.
And it was a bar graph that showed, 4 classes, 1 class, 3 classes. So you'll get a better look at that data next week. And then it's something that we can ask our high school team to keep us updated on so that we can update the committee.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, to Martha, thank you. Martha Raymond, thank you on the special ed angle. And Amanda, I don't think anyone thanked you for your presentation. I'll try not to talk too much. Thank you.
Dr. Bacon, I think tying into what Ted was asking about, I think we had talked in the spring or at some point about how the disengaged kids, are they kind of grouped in with the I don't want to say special needs, but the cohort of kids who are back earlier?
No, they're not. Again, it's a conversation that we had at the district level. And the decision was made that our first priority should be bringing in the students with disabilities who had specific legal, services that we are legally obligated to provide. But as the superintendent pointed out before, our next set of priorities includes our English language, our gen ed students who are struggling, our English language learners, and our students who were disengaged in the spring and who are struggling to be successful in the fall. So,
right.
Not only is it about bringing them back into school in person, but again, next week I'll talk about all the other kinds of support programs we're getting up and running to help address those needs.
That's great. Thank you.
Are we getting that report at the next meeting, or do we have a meeting next week?
No, I'm sorry. I mean, next meeting.
Okay, so we're not getting that report tonight on.
No.
Originally, Dr. Bacon was going to talk to us tonight about that, but because of all of the time spent on the community questions, we shelved it for the next meeting. Anything? Okay.
That concludes my report.
Pam, how are the kids from the medical program? Do we have any?
We have 17 students riding the bus, and we talked about this morning, and Latoya was happy to report that. However, I did ask if she thought that would increase after some of the other families saw how the first week went, and she said she was hopeful. So 17 out of 54 or 57, ladies help me, is not a large number, but I want to keep track of whether or not that increases over the next week.
And that's district-wide 17?
Yes.
Wow, that's low.
Is the busing an issue? Because they're just turning around and going back home, or is there somewhere for them to go for a few hours and do their asynchronous or their hybrid?
First of all, I will say that the bus, Latoya reported today that the bus ride is much shorter, but I will turn this over to Martha Seibert to chime in.
Sure. So one of the things that Latoya did a masterful job of was condensing the number of stops so that the children are not on the bus for an extended period of time. So as the superintendent said, the bus ride home is about 45 minutes to an hour versus at some points last year it was over an hour and a half. So it's a much quicker bus ride for them, which is great because they're having to wear a mask and stay socially distant. I will say that, now I forget what the question was about.
Numbers lower.
I I was also wondering, like the bus, they're not just turning around and going home at 12:30.
No, thank you, thank you. No, they're not. So at the high school has a full day. And so at the middle school, the students that are at the middle school, we have a spot for them to go so that they can log on and do log into their Zoom classrooms, because there'd be no ability for them to get home and log in from home. Our children that live in Swampscott and Nahant are able to get home and have lunch and log in for their afternoon learning. Our Boston students would not be able to get home in time to log in for afternoon learning. So right now we're running one bus for middle school and high school.
And elementary. We have an elementary student here too.
Oh, I thought that last I knew the elementary students were remote. So one family must have changed their mind. That's wonderful.
Yes, so we do. We have, that student is able to stay too with a combination of help from our Swampscott families and for some extra services that we're able to do in the afternoon. I think there's a combination of things. Probably in Boston, it's a lot different feel than what's happening here because the numbers are a lot higher there. So I think that might be part of it. I think the bus ride, people were concerned about having to have kids be on the bus that long with a mask on and then come to school for a mask on. See, could they tolerate that? So I think, and also there's, it's similar to people here that chose remote too. People live with relatives that they're worried about. So, but we're hoping that number will increase if they see the success.
Can we, I would imagine, I know LaToya is very tuned into this, but can we make sure that the kids who are coming that it's not just luck, whether or not they have a family here to help them out should they need it? I just think like that's a long day and a quiet day. And if they could have the opportunity to have a local family who is, comfortable bringing somebody in, that would be very helpful. Okay, so next up is, unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to move forward. My chair update, I pretty much gave at the beginning, which was about what took place in our meeting with Sean Fitzgerald and Peter Spelios. So I don't have anything else there. And so the subcommittee, Suzanne, do you have anything to report? I know you had a surprise meeting or
Well, it wasn't really a surprise meeting. We have a deliverable due to the MSBA on November 6th. So a rough draft went in yesterday. I mean, a draft of the submission, and the final draft is due next week. And so we just needed to include in that some minutes that we needed to approve. So we had a really quick meeting last night to approve minutes, but otherwise we're sort of taking a little break because this PSR submission that explains our preferred option and why and all the work that went into it is due at the MSBA, and then they'll review it for a few weeks. We'll probably edit it. We'll probably go back and forth about some questions, and then we have a board meeting with them in the beginning of December. So
just remind me, what does PSR stand for?
So it's the preferred schematic report.
Okay.
So it's where we came up with our preferred option, and it explains sort of all the work that went into it and why that one was chosen and why the other ones weren't, and what the education in the district is going to look like going forward. So, superintendent has some work to do for that, and the design team had a lot of work to do for that. So,
okay.
So that's where we're at right now. A little bit of a lull before we start with when we come back, Christmas time or the beginning of the new year, we'll be having some community workshops on different things about the building, specifically with neighborhood concerns, and just keep plugging on till we design the building. So that's where we're at.
All right. I just want to make sure everybody saw the email from Maureen Karen about saving the date for December 16th. We're going to meet with Dorothy Presser from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees for a training session. We haven't done one in a while, focusing on our roles, and particularly our roles during the time of COVID.
That'd be great.
So make sure.
Not just the committee, or is it going to be the broader group too?
Well, it's definitely for the committee. I think it's, think about if we would like to include anybody else, whether or not, I want to be very mindful of not putting another nighttime meeting on our administrator's lap, but if you guys feel strongly they should be there, or, members of our team, if it's something that you would like to be a part of, I would, I want to be fully inclusive of it, but I don't want to require it of you. And probably the same for our student leaders. Maybe we think about whether or not we want, that would be something that's beneficial for them. So I'm open to recommendations or requests.
Are we going to try to do this live? Like in person?
I think, I don't know.
All right.
I would vote yes if Dorothy was able to do that.
Dorothy's open to it. Yeah, it'd be nice to actually meet you,
I
John.
mean, sometimes that's nice. We haven't really been together since John's been on here. It's kind of weird.
Okay. Well, and that's probably a good thing, because then we don't have to worry about, there isn't a requirement for public access, so we don't have to worry about limiting the size.
Right.
Okay, I will, I'll email her tomorrow and ask her if she's willing to do that.
Amy, can I ask one question? I think Martha Seibert might be able to help me on it.
Sure.
I thought in the past, did we have a couple of families that were having trouble hooking up with the internet? Are they all straight now?
Excuse me. Yes, the district did purchase. It's not a cough. I just haven't talked, so I have a tickle in my throat. Okay.
See the nurse.
Yeah, the district did purchase a number of hotspots, and some of them have been distributed. And we're working through with each individual family to get them what they need for resources. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, I'm going to move into the consent agenda, which is designed to expedite the handling of routine and miscellaneous business of the district. The school committee may adopt the entire consent agenda with one motion. At the request, any committee member may, any items may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on a regular agenda for discussion. Tonight, we have 4 things. We have our policy subcommittee minutes from October 13th. We have our 2 regular session minutes, one from October 14th and one from October 19th. And then we have warrant number 2016. Can I take a motion to approve?
Amy, I have a question just before we jump in. If that's
Hold on, let me just take the motions and then we'll go into the discussion.
I'll
Do I
make
have
a motion, Amy.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? John.
So I did reach out to Mrs. Seibert and her team on warrant 2016, just so I could see that before we met tonight. And they were very helpful. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's a technology issue, but I still was unable to view it. So I haven't seen that one. The rest of them I'm comfortable with, but that one I have not seen in advance of the meeting.
All right.
I will be following up.
So why don't we remove that one and vote on it separately so that you can abstain from the vote? We'll just treat them as 2 separates. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Anything else? All right, so procedurally, I'm trying to think of what I need to do. Do we need to, will somebody?
You would approve the consent agenda and then approve that one
So if
separate.
somebody can recall the.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda without the warrant in it.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so all in favor of approving policy subcommittee minutes, regular minutes from October 14th and session minutes from October 19th. I need a roll call vote. Suzanne?
Yes.
Ted?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Karen?
Yes.
And then me makes it a yes, so those are approved. And then
Now I'll make a motion to approve the warrant.
Number 2016. Do I have a second?
Second.
Sorry.
Second.
All right, all in favor, roll call vote. Suzanne,
Yes.
Ted,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, and John is abstaining. That should do it. So then without further ado, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Do I have a second?
Yes.
All in favor, Karen,
Yes.
Coming right now.
John,
Yes.
Suzanne,
Yes.
Ted,
Yes.
and I am a yes. We are adjourned at 9 o'clock.
Night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on for a second, Amy.
All right, so I turned off the recording.
Yep, don't stop the live yet.
Okay.